Good Saturday morning, everyone. Today on Perspectives, exciting news about continuing plans to bring the lives of the founding citizens of historic Africatown to life, along with a little closure for their descendants. It has only been in recent times the heinous story of the slave ship Clotilda, long known in Mobile, was brought to international attention. The selling and forceful enslavement of 110 human beings from Africa in 1860. It was a story handed down by the people of Africatown for generations. Now, as we all know, the last slave ship, the Clotilda, to the United States was illegal and began allegedly as a financial bet between two men. The Clotilda's owner, Timothy Mayer, wagered that he could get away with it. The ship sailed into the Mobile Bay River Delta in 1860. The bought human cargo was disembarked quickly and then later sold. The Clotilda was sailed up into the Delta River area, then burned in order to hide evidence of the crime. Detractors of the story said it was a myth until the remains of the slave ship was found just 2 years ago. Now, 2 years ago, the news of the ship's discovery electrified America and the world. And thanks to the interest and the intense interest in that, steps are being taken now to create an historical and cultural center in this area of Mobile, still known today as Africatown. Now, earlier this year, the Mobile County Commission approved more than $1.3 million to build the Africatown Heritage House and a garden. Now, the city of Mobile is chipping in another $250,000 for the exhibit, which may include part of the ship preserved in a water tank.
Its initial purpose is to serve as a venue for an exhibit that will include artifacts from the wreckage of the Clotilda. The exhibit will tell the entire Africatown story, but it'll be unique in that this will be the first opportunity for the public to really be able to see those artifacts.
Our guests this morning are here to share the exciting news for Africatown and the descendants of the slave ship Clotilda's illegal human cargo. We'll also talk with a descendant of the Clotilda's captain, William Foster, who brought the Africans to Mobile on that illegal 1860 voyage. Darren Patterson, president of the Clotilda Descendants Association, is here this morning, and we'll also meet and talk to Mike Foster, whose ancestor was William Foster, the captain of the Clotilda. And Clotilda descendants and Spirit of Our Ancestors Festival participants, Patricia Frazier and Rose Tunstall, will join all of us here this Saturday morning. Now, Africatown and descendants of the Clotilda when Perspectives continues after this quick break. Our guests this morning, Pat Frazier, along with Rose Tunstall. They are both descendants of some of the people brought over to America on the Clotilda in 1860. You're familiar with the story of Africatown as well as the people who have come from that lineage. And of course, an incredible history this morning. We're talking more about it and updating us on the things that have developed in the last year. Ladies, thank you both for being a part of the discussion this morning.
Thank you for inviting us.
You know, a lot of times we hear the stories about the men of the Clotilda, the men and the things that they accomplished and did, but the story not told as much about the women. But there is an incredible legacy and history of both of your ancestors on the female side of the lineage. And Pat, we'll start with you talking about Lottie Dennison. Give us an idea of her story. And she was there coming up Mobile Bay in 1860 here in our area. Tell us some more about Lottie Dennison.
Lottie was a small-framed person. I think that she probably was no more than a little bit above 5 feet tall. But family lore has it, and also some of the other ancestors corroborated that in that book by sketches of, oh goodness, I always get that confused. Anyway, it was one of the earliest books that tried to track the ancestors. But anyway, Lottie was known supposedly to be a very strong, physically strong person. And family lore has it that on one occasion, when a constable came to discuss with her something about whatever was going on her farm, and she didn't like what he had to say, she actually was supposed to have picked him up and tossed him over the fence at her house. Lottie and her husband James were described as having enough acreage that they had a farm within the city. She also was known to love music, and she loved music so much that she actually bought instruments that all of her grandchildren played. One of her grandchildren was my grandmother, Ada, and my grandmother played the trombone. And there were many other instruments that the other grandchildren played. And they actually had a family band that used to entertain in the community because they had all learned to play music.
My goodness.
And she was supposed to be known for raising good pork and smoking bacon in her outhouse. And
Quite a lady who helped things developed as far as the family and the struggles, you could say, from the beginning of coming here, brought on the ship and shackled on that voyage across the Atlantic. Now, Rose, you are a descendant of Polly Allen, one of the men that we hear a lot about. But coming up here shortly, we're going to learn more about the women. What can you tell us about some of the other women they found that may have even outlived Cudjoe Lewis here in America?
I unfortunately don't know a lot about the other women. I haven't heard as much about Rose Allen either, unfortunately. She was the first wife of Polly Allen. I share her name. My grandmother shares her name. So I affectionately call her Mama Rose.
And when you talk about the stories that you have heard about Polly Allen, what can you tell us about him?
I just know he's, I haven't heard as much, honestly, Eric, about these individuals. I've heard more about the other survivors of the Clotilda. Polly and Rose maybe were some of the more quiet ones. Not as much information about them was passed down.
Right. And of course, we're in that season of learning more about the Clotilda as well as the descendants. Give us an idea what you felt when you heard that the ship's wreckage had been found.
I was it made me feel a lot more attached to my history. It's something that I've just heard about for many years. And it just made me feel more attached because now there was tangible proof of what happened. And
I guess, Pat, too, a lot of people growing up, they had some of the history passed down, but without the visible proof, a lot of folks said that it was a myth and it was just folklore. What was your feeling when you heard that they had found the wreckage of the Clotilda?
Well, there was never any doubts in my mind that the wreckage was there. So it was just evidence that they were able to bring some of the pieces or some of the remnants to the surface, because actually there was a visible sighting of that ship maybe sometime in the early 1900s. So I had a great aunt who was very good at our family history, and she actually had done a memoir for Lottie Dennison and had an early picture of that wreckage. So it was like it was resurfacing for me. And another validation.
Yes, a lot of importance in that, because you all, being descendants, are living history of what happened back in 1860. Now, when we talk about the women of the Clotilda and the women of Africatown, what do you think of first?
In my case, I'm sure I think about a woman, especially my ancestor, who was a true partner to her husband. So she was perhaps as well known as he was, and for a generation in which women did not oftentimes play but distant roles in a family, I think that she was supposed to have been like his business manager of the farm. And then the other ladies also were persons who had contributed. They raised vegetables and helped to raise money for their husbands to actually purchase the property that they owned. So they were contributors.
You know, when you talk about the church there in the community and you see the names listed there, and of course there are men and women listed, that seems to be a source of pride for the women as well as everyone from the community.
Yes, and Rose Allen and Polly Allen are co-founders of Union Baptist Church. And that church has a lot of history for me. My parents were married there. I was married there. My brother was married there. My children were baptized there. So there's a lot of history for our family there. And as Lottie said, I agree with what I think about when I think about the women of the Clotilda. I think about strength, and I think about just perseverance. Like you said, they're the reason we're here.
Yes.
And being a co-founder of Union Baptist also means to me that Rose Allen was a partner, and the women were sometimes a bit of a footnote in the history, but without them, of course, none of the rest would be possible.
That's right. A very strong heritage and history there. And of course, we will be able to learn more coming up at the festival for 2021, as there will be a focus on the women of Africatown and the Clotilda, to hear their stories and learn more about their contributions to that community that became an incredible testimony to resilience, as you said, Rose, as well as Pat as well. Ladies, we thank you so much for being a part of sharing this morning, and we'll have more information shown in our graphics talking about how to participate in the upcoming festival here on the following weekend after this program airs in February. Thank you both so much.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Perspectives, and joining us now, Darren Patterson, who is the president of the Clotilda Descendants Association, and Mike Foster, who is a descendant of the Clotilda ship's captain, William Foster. We thank you both, gentlemen, for being a part of this discussion this morning.
Thank you, Eric.
Now, Mike, I tell you, when I saw you on 60 Minutes, I was just elated. I'm talking about some incredible emotions and feelings that we had someone who was sharing the history of this event that happened back in 1860. And one of the first questions I wondered for you was, when you got that call with someone asking you and talking about that, was that the first time that you'd ever heard about William Foster or the Clotilda or Africatown?
Well, I had known a number of years before. I first found out in November of 2013 when I was working on Foster family history. I went to the internet and Googled Foster history Nova Scotia, and what came up was, it said Fisher's Grant 24, which was basically land that was given to a man named Fisher by the King of England. And so he established a colony there. And I learned at that point that I had a number of relatives that lived in what was called Fisher's Grant, which is now called Pictou, Nova Scotia. And they were involved with the sea a lot. And one of the men that was in the family history was one of my third great-grandfather's nephews, William Foster. And so I knew that in November 2013. I put it on a family group sheet.
Wow.
But
what was your thought when you tied in and found out about William Foster and his endeavor with the bet and making that happen in 1860, when the importation had been illegal for many years?
Well, I sent an email to the person about 5 years afterwards, because it was on the first sheet of the information. And he got back with me and he said, "Did you know that William Foster had been the captain of the last slave ship?" And I told him, no, I'd never heard about that. And it was very distressing to hear that, and to know that one of my relatives, my first cousin 4 times removed, had participated in that. So I did some Googling. I eventually got a hold of some material. I read a couple of the books, including Barracoon, and I also got in touch with Ben Raines. The initial phone calls, he told me he had not found the ship, but phone calls after, we did talk about the fact that he had.
So what were your thoughts being there a long ways away from this part of the country, and of course not near the Gulf or the Atlantic? What were your thoughts when you heard this story and when you learned the details of what had happened?
Well, it was kind of frustrating because, you know, I'm even living here in Montana, I'm kind of isolated from the area. So, but I was able to, at some point, you know, talk to Ben and also to Darren. And so that kind of brought me a little bit closer to it. And I got their input as to what had happened.
Yeah, well, I tell you, I was very proud of you to participate in that program and to share the story. And Darren, what was your thought? Because I was extremely surprised. You had not told me about this, and watching the program to see this happen, it brought in a lot of memories and other things for me. What was your feeling when you were connected to Mike?
Well, it was all very surprising, and the reason I didn't tell you was because they made it very clear, the 60 Minutes people, that we don't want to reveal Michael Foster. They wanted it to be their little secret, and we went through all kinds of things to make sure that nobody knew about Michael Foster. Even when he came down to Missoula, they brought him through the back door, and Mike has this story about how they brought him through the back door and all this stuff. But it was really interesting, and we are so glad to have Mike as part of the story, because Captain Foster is part of the story. Timothy Mayer is part of the story. This is one of the things that we're hoping for now, to involve the Mayer family in the story, because they are part of the story.
Yes.
And we want to make sure that everyone who is a part of this story is integrally involved, because it's very important that the entire story is told.
Exactly. I think it speaks volumes for Mike, because this is not Mike. Mike didn't do it. It's his ancestor, and all of us, we're not responsible for decisions that were made, especially back in 1860 for our families, but yet the intriguing history and the aspect of this was outlawed, but yet it happened, and here you all are as a descendant, and your children and your family who made the best of what was ahead from that period of time. And so, Darren, what do you hope will happen now that Mike has come forward, and the sharing of the different families who were involved in the story? What would you like to happen from this point?
Well, so much has happened since they found the ship and since Mike has come forward. And now we're just encouraging everyone who may have any part or any story or anything they can add to what is going on with this. I don't want to call it a movement, but Eric, it's just really started rolling since they found the ship in June of 19, or May of 19, I believe. And now the Descendants Association, we're finding our relatives everywhere. We're finding doctors and lawyers and MBAs and scientists and all over the place.
Yes.
And we're hoping to involve Ancestry.com soon in terms of helping us find the rest of them. It's really picked up steam. It is bigger than anyone ever imagined it would be, and it's real. You know, for a long time they said, oh, the Clotilda doesn't exist, that's only an old wives' tale, but it really existed. This really happened. They really did spirit 110 enslaved Africans here 161 years ago against their will in a 5 by 20 cargo hold, naked for 2 months on the water. It's a hell of a story, Eric.
Yes,
it's a hell of a story.
Tell us about how Hannah Durkin works into this story now, because you're learning more about some of the women of the Africatown experience.
Correct. Dr. Hannah Durkin is in England. She's going to be the keynote speaker for our Spirit of Our Ancestors Festival, our 3rd annual Spirit of Our Ancestors Festival, which Ms. Jocelyn Davis is the organizer of. And Dr. Durkin is a noted historian. She talks about this type history all the time. She is going to be very instrumental in the festival this year, which is February 13th 13th, and it'll be a virtual webinar. And we would love for everybody to tune in. We'll have a link to that webinar so you'll know how to join and when to join and that type thing.
All right.
But it's going to be a very, very interesting festival. You know, COVID has made everything and everybody do things differently.
Yes.
So we've had to adjust.
All right.
We're looking forward to it.
Well, gentlemen, I thank you both so much for taking time to share with us. Mike Foster, a descendant of the ship's captain of the Clotilda, and Darren Patterson, who is a descendant also of Polly Allen, who was one of the passengers in that cargo hold on the slave ship Clotilda. We thank you both so much for sharing, and of course we look forward to hearing more about the reunions now of the different descendants of this experience that it has turned into, as you said, Darren, incredible. Thank you both very much.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds.
And Mike Foster told us that one of the main reasons he came for it is because he thinks it's important that the families acknowledge their history. And he says the Mayer family has yet to acknowledge their ancestors' role as the owner of the Clotilda. Now, for more information on Africatown and the Clotilda story, you can join a special webinar titled Africatown's 2021 Spirit of Our Ancestors Festival. It will be held virtually on Saturday, February the 13th, and you can register by going to the website, theclotildastory.com. Now, as we've learned, more Clotilda survivors have been discovered who outlived Cudjo Lewis, the man believed to be the last living survivor of the slave ship until his death in 1935. Two women who were enslaved and transported to Selma survived Lewis by several years. Their stories will be featured in this webinar. Well, please join us here next Saturday morning at 9 for Perspectives as we discuss important issues and seek solutions. Being prepared for weather threats and hazards, that's our discussion next Saturday morning. I'm Eric Reynolds. Have a great week.
Thanks for watching Fox 10 News. Watch us live wherever you are on our mobile, our streaming news app, and you can also watch us on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV.